Today we're going to start our Unit 1B, which is called Intro to Functions. And before we even get into what a function is, we have to start with what a relation is. So in your notes, make sure to write the word relation as your new vocab word. So first let's just write the basic definition. A relation is a set of pairs of input and output values. And a lot of times when we refer to input values, the variable we use is x, and for output values, the variables we typically use is a y. And what we'll get into tomorrow is that a function is just a special type of relation that meets specific requirements about that relationship between input and output. So now let's look at some characteristics of relations. So there's multiple forms that we can represent a relation with. The first one might be ordered pairs, so the point 2, 1 would be an ordered pair. Maybe an input-output table, which sometimes is a vertical table, or it could be a horizontal table, which we'll get to in some later examples. Since we can write them as ordered pairs, that means we can also graph them as a point on a coordinate plane. One of the newer ways you'll see them that you probably haven't seen before is called a mapping. And it's kind of like a table, but instead of it looking like that, it's going to have like ovals with some arrows pointing different ways, and we don't repeat entries. So you'll definitely get some more examples of that in a minute, since that one's new. And of course we can use some sort of equation to represent a relationship between an input x and an output y. Okay, so some examples of this might be a set of ordered pairs, which you're going to kind of use that squiggly bracket to start. And I'm just making up these points for this example. It's nothing special. But the point 4, 7, 3, 2, 0, 0, and -1, -4 is what I'm going to use for your first example, so that would represent a relation. We could also do this same exact relation as a table. Okay, so remember that the x values are the first coordinate in each point, because we always write a point in ABC order. Okay, so it would be 4, and then 3, 0, -1, and then the y values are the second value in the ordered pair, and we just have to make sure they're partnered up together. So 4 has to go with 7, 3 has to go with 2, 0 has to go with 0, and -1 has to go with -4. So those are two examples of how you could represent a relation. We're going to go through all of these that we just talked about throughout the video, but just for this particular page of notes, you can write one of those down. And so for the last part of this page, we're going to do some non-examples, things that are not relations. So just a plain old x, that's a variable, and all by itself like that, it does not represent a relation. Just like if I had the number 42, that's just a constant. It does not represent a relation. Or if we had a sequence of numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, that's not a relation either. That's called a sequence. Okay, so those are things that do not represent what we're talking about when I say the word relation. Okay, so on to the next page. This is where we're going to do specific examples of what each of these forms look like so that you can start to get familiar with each. So again, for the ordered pairs, you have to have a curly bracket to open and to close the set. And those take some practice, trust me, before they start looking the way you want them to, but you'll get the hang of it. And when we write the ordered pairs, we separate them with a comma, and each one is in a normal set of parentheses. Okay, and once you get all your points written down for this set, you're again going to close it out with another curly bracket. Now we're going to do the same values again as an input-output table. Since we did our last one horizontally, I'll do this one vertically. So an x and a y for input and output. Okay, so for our first ordered pair, We have x as a 1 and y as a 5. For the second one, we have a -2 and a +7. I might run out of room here, bear with me. A 4 and then a 3, a 0 and a 0, and a -2 and a -3. Hopefully you used your space a little better than me. Okay, but that's going to be an example, and like sometimes they're completely boxed off. Mine doesn't look very pretty, but you get the idea. So for this type of table, the x is always the left column, y is always the right column. If we have the kind like the previous one that goes across, x is always the top and y is always the bottom row. So that's something to keep in mind. Alright, so since we were able to plot or to write those points as a set, we can also plot them on a coordinate grid. And I'm not going to do a super detailed one here, it's kind of just a rough sketch. But as you remember, your x goes to the left, your y goes up, 0 is here in the middle, and let's see what our biggest point was. Let's see, our biggest x value was a 4, and the smallest one was a -2. And for y values, we went up to 7, and the lowest we went was -3. Okay, so now I've got to think about my graph. And on second thought, I might actually move this guy down lower since we have to go all the way up to 7, but we only have to go as far down as -3. Okay, and I just kind of drew my dashes as evenly spaced as possible, and now I'm going to try to plot some points. So our first point was 1, 5. So remember, you do the x first and then the y second. So 1 for x and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for y. It's going to put it in this vicinity here. Then -2, 7 is going to be to the left and up. 4, 3 is right and up. 0, 0 is nice and easy. And the last one was -2, -3, so left 2 and down 3. And that is one way to represent a relation as a coordinate plane. Okay, so this last way to represent a relation is called a mapping diagram, and this is the one where we're going to have two oval shapes. Sometimes they're rectangles, I like them as ovals. And it's kind of like a table where the left one is your input and the right one is your output. But we're not going to repeat any x values, okay? So our first one was, let's see. Let's actually put them in order this time. So the most negative x value we have was the -2. And even though it shows up twice, I'm only going to write it once. Okay, and then we hit a 0 for an x value, and then a 1 and a 4. Then I'm going to look at my y values. So the lowest y value we have is this -3, then 0, 3, 5, 7. And notice that there are more y values here than there are x values because we did have 2 points with the same x value and we didn't have to repeat it. So now what we're going to do is draw an arrow from the x value to its partner. So the first point I'll do is -2, +7. So I'm going to start at the -2. I'm going to draw an arrow down to the +7 to represent that relation. Next I'm going to do -2, -3. So I'm going to start at -2 and draw an arrow to -3 to represent that relation. Then 0, 0, 1, 5, and 4, 3. Okay, so I really like mappings. I think they're fun, and they really make it easier to see if anything's repeated because those are the ones that have 2 arrows coming out of the same x value. That's going to be it for this video. Make sure to check out the next one on domain and range with relations.